Now, I want to dig a little more into palace architecture and the article that you read for today by Thaler. Um, we have at Mycenaean palaces built around this large central courtyard. And you can kind of see this here at the Palace of Nestor. Uh, their excavations at Tiryns show this in the same way. And the palace itself opens up on a megaron. The courtyard opens up on a megaron, and this is the central focus of the administrative center and religious festivals that are going on here in these palace systems. And this is a structure that has an open porch. You can see it here, and here's the megaron at Mycenae, and this is largely borrowed from Near Eastern architecture, and in particular Phoenician architecture. So this is something that becomes incorporated in from late Bronze Age, the Near East, as a symbol of power in Mycenaean society, from the much larger, much more prominent societies of Mesopotamia and the Hittites. So this structure has an open porch that is open to a large courtyard, and then has an antechamber before you reach into a large throne room. And here you can see the throne. And the article basically argues that you would have done this in a presentation round. Now, the entrance to the palace was tightly controlled, with separate entrances for the public and for the workers. Right? And so we can kind of think about this as part of the importance of the palace is a place where people come together at very particular times. Right? And so the public areas are lined with these frescoes that highlight the activities of the state and their symbolic importance. That is, it is a symbolic representation, a reinforcing of what's going on within the palace complex. And it's to kind of reconstruct that identity, right? We can think back to the Neo-Assyrian palaces and those images of warfare that were undertaken in Ashurbanipal's and Sennacherib's palaces, right? Showing the siege of Lachish was meant to show the power of the Assyrian kings. Well, we see the same thing here. Those scenes that people would have seen on the frescoes reinforces that relationship of power. So as you're kind of walk through the colonnaded corridors and into the central courtyard, you see all these frescoes that remind you of your place and your association with this. And the main reason people are probably coming into the palace and to begin with is through feasting. Right, so the key aspect of Minoan and Mycenaean society, was state-sponsored feasts. So these are held both within the palace, and you can see representations of that palatial feasting. And then here, the ceramic remains, the crater and the pithoi and the cooking vessels that we see found at Pylos inside of the palace kitchens. Right, so we can then see this as kind of serving wares or for these large-scale feasts in these courtyards. And not just with the singular courtyard, there are multiple phases of the courtyard, so you can think about increased access. The higher status you are, the deeper you go into these courtyards within the complex. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that they held these palace feasts, but they also held feasts within the local communities as well. And the reason we can kind of point to this is Halstead's research on the faunal remains, and we find an emphasis on cattle. And cattle itself in antiquity lends itself to feasting, right? Because you can't preserve. Think about how much is in a side of beef. 400 pounds of meat, right? That you then have to deal with. So you either have to divvy it up among a lot of people or cook it all at once. Right, and bring everybody together. And so that what we can think about is the state recognizing the importance of cattle. And this is reflected in those images like the bull frescoes and the large cattle skull sculptures that appear all over Mycenaean society. Right, these are ideas. The bull here represents that kind of state power, because by sacrificing or killing a bull or a cow, right, you are providing a lot of meat at once, and that sets the stage for a feast. And if you can control access to that, then you're the person doling out beef, right, through this, and becomes an important symbolic reminder. Right? And so we kind of think about everything as a give and take. What does the state take? It takes taxes and agricultural produce, but what does it give? And the give here is beef, right? It is food through this. So the state used food and probably alcohol, wine and beer that are served in these large-scale feasts, because we can always see an association with the food, the drinking cups that are associated with them as well. So the Mycenaean and Minoan societies are built up around these large-scale central courtyards, both in small and large communities within the palace occupations itself, that provided food and alcohol to the inhabitants. And that helps to kind of offset the extractive principles of the state. It creates an identity, a sociality of belonging through all of this, to belonging to a state system that washes over the exploitative nature of it. Right, and these appear to have happened relatively frequently based on the faunal remains. It's not like the state once a year said, "All right, here's your tax return in the form of a bull," but rather we can kind of think about these as relatively frequent, maybe bi-weekly or weekly events for feast days, and we can kind of think back this to the Catholic Church and saints festivals and feast days within the Catholic Church as a way to kind of to redistribute those resources to everyone in society to keep people engaged in the system. So I think the feasting here and the palace layout is a representation of the importance of bringing people together in the sharing of food and alcohol through this.